Hi, welcome to AI Impacts. This week we've got Chris Quickfall in. Chris is the CEO of a company called Cognassist. And Cognassist work to help companies become neurodivergent. Chris, welcome to AI Impacts.
Good. Thank you very much, Dean, and thanks for having me on your show.
No, it's great to have you.
We support organizations to develop neuro-inclusion strategies and support neurodiverse and non-neurodiverse staff members.
So that's with software, right?
We're a software-first business, so a lot of businesses go in on the neuro-inclusion aspect with consultancy services, which are great, but very expensive and very inaccessible.
Okay.
And we wanted to see if we could sort of democratise that, make it available to a lot more people at a more sensitive price point.
And so what sort of challenges do companies have in becoming neurodivergent? Are there sort of typical problems that they'll encounter or typical issues they don't understand maybe?
In becoming neuro-inclusive.
In becoming neuro-inclusive. Sorry, these, yeah.
Yeah. So I'll just explain a little bit about the sort of neurodiversity. So
yeah, if you could.
Yeah, our brains are super complex. They're around about 2 to 3% of our body mass, but they consume 20% of our calorific energy. They move around base elements like magnesium, sodium, potassium to create potential electro differences. And they're the electricity that moves through our brains that creates our thoughts, allows us to access memories. And we have about 800 trillion of these connections. So super complex. No brain before has ever looked like your brain. No brain after ever will. So really, really complex things. And we have different strengths and weaknesses in our cognition. That comes from either when we were born, what genes did we inherit, what happened to us in the womb, and what happens to us in the first 7 years of our life. And that forms our cognitive architecture. And then we have that architecture for life. We have different strengths and weaknesses, and those strengths and weaknesses orientate how we process the world around us. And we all have sort of biases. Some people like processing other information above different types. And this bias and processing means that we respond slightly differently to the world around us. And that's the sort of the neurodiversity of our species.
So is everyone's neurodivergent from everybody else in that sort of sense? Everyone's slightly different?
Yeah, absolutely. So the term neurodivergent was coined, I think, around about 10 to 12 years ago to specifically carve out people that have diagnosed or diagnosable neurodifferences. But there's a sort of clinical mean brain that's recognized by the World Health Organization. And we've mapped 300,000 people's brains, and we've proven that so far no one has that brain.
So when you say we've mapped, I mean, what do you mean we've mapped?
So part of what we do is we map how your brain processes information. Okay. And we feed that back to you. And those biases and what your brain really likes to focus on and finds it more difficult to focus on, we feed that. So this is
Cognassist has done this 300,000 brains.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, that's staggering.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about how? Like, what is the collection method there to do the analysis?
Yes, people always ask me, do you put things on top of people's brains?
Yeah.
And no, you don't do that. So the first clinical experiment into how brains process information was conducted in 1906. And it was in London, and they had a theory that all the rich people were very clever, and all the people that aren't rich aren't very clever.
And was this the rich people's theory?
This was the rich people's theory, yeah. Surprise.
Yeah.
So there was a theory of intelligence that basically meant, suggested that you have smart people and dumb people in a straight line in between, and we all sit at some point on that line. So they did this, and rich people are on the smart side.
And is this kind of where IQ sort of comes from, the notion of like...
That was the concept of, ultimately.
Right.
Yeah. And that concept of intelligence doesn't really exist and was debunked back in 1906.
Sure.
In fact, we're still carrying it on nearly 1.25 centuries later. Is surprising. We should have really recognized the differences in human cognition, but we still haven't yet. So they conducted this experiment, and the rich people turned out to be doing better and worse than the poor people. So they said, this must be, our theory of single intelligence must be incorrect. And they came up with a new theory called dual intelligences.
Right.
So that was 1906. We had lots of world wars where they started tracking what part of the brain, if it's missing, can't people do.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Then late 70s MRI machines came out. Started being able to see inside the brain, see what's going on. So cognitive neuropsychology started really expanding. And we've got a theory called the Kaplan-Hall-Carroll model of neurocognition. And it lists, so we've gone from those two types of intelligence. We now have, I think, 96 different types of intelligence that the brain can process.
Oh, wow.
So
that's like, what are those, some of those different types that are they easily labelable, or are they sort of deep science terms that we wouldn't understand?
So they have crazy science terms that you might not understand, but someone can explain them to you. Like, oh yeah. So if you look down on your desk, if your desk's a rectangle, you're probably going to see it a little bit of. You're going to go look at it. All right, this is a rectangle.
Yeah.
But actually, your brain's had to reprocess the shape of that because you're seeing it as
because you're looking at
like a trapezoid,
parallelogram sort of thing, because you're looking at it in perspective.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But when you ask you what shape is it, you reprocess that and say it's a rectangle.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one type of intelligence.
Right.
Being able to reason with language in your head is another type of intelligence. Being able to reason with spatial structures is another type of intelligence.
So this is kind of like a layering that builds up the personality, or not personality, but the brain type. Is that the way to think about
ability?
it? Yeah.
So that individual's cognitive diversity.
Gotcha.
We all have particular biases. We're just designed to do that.
Interesting. And so the neurodivergent sort of categories that you'd look to support, so that the neurodiversity that you want to introduce into companies or help companies promote is things like autism and dyslexia and dyspraxia and things like that.
So we don't diagnose anything that's sort of your Asperger's, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia, ADHD, and things like that. What we want to do is we want to support that individual to better understand themselves.
Oh, interesting.
Enhance strategies that enable them to be able to use their thinking difference more to their advantage.
Okay. So the idea, I guess, is that, obviously, if everyone's totally divergent, then then these labels that we're attaching, maybe for our convenience, are actually inhibiting the individual because it's pigeonholing them into something which doesn't necessarily apply, and they're an individual brain with, their own patterns.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And we've historically societies tended to associate neurodifferences with a deficit model.
Right.
Dyslexic people can't read. Well,
like actually, it's a disability instead of an enablement.
Instead of just a difference, right?
Just a difference. Whereas actually, what we know is that the brain, when it develops, does really strange things. And one of those strange things is where it deviates from that typical range. It often has really strong strengths as well as being able to not do other things.
Yeah.
So intelligence is actually what we're learning now. It's much more around perspective. How is the brain processing the world around it, rather than that theory of intelligence that was debunked in 1906. They have smart people and stupid people and everything in between.
Yeah.
It's actually much more around perspective. So I was diagnosed as dyslexic when I was 21 at university.
And how did that diagnosis change your perspective on sort of life?
Well, I went through this process, which is now what we try to do with Cognassist, where a gentleman sort of mapped my cognition, and then he sat us down afterwards. It was a 2-hour paper-based test, cost about, in dollar terms, about $1,500. My university paid. And he sat us down and said, "Oh, Chris, you're pretty dyslexic. I'm not sure if you know that." No one's ever told me this before. What does it mean? And he said, "You're not very good at language processing. And I've got, there's a phonological component, which means my brain struggles to turn symbols into sounds, hold them in short-term working memory, associate meaning with those sounds, and then do the reverse. So things like reading, writing, slower or more complex.
Sure.
But your spatial processing is much, much stronger. So you said things like, I bet you can't pass exams, but I bet you're an awesome problem solver.
Right.
And I was like, well, actually, I can't pass exams, and I'm pretty good at solving problems as long as it's maths.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I studied mechanical engineering. I like problem solving with maths. So I said, yeah, it's this sort of way. And then he gave me some strategies. So because your brain works like this, a lot of the techniques that you'll have been trained at school don't work very well for your brain. So I'll give you some new techniques, try them, see how it goes, and I'll also write to your university, and I'll give you more sophisticated techniques through the university.
Wow.
And I thought, is this actually going to make much of a difference? Because the 3 techniques he gave us were super simple.
Right.
So the first one was, don't use lined paper, use plain paper. Your brain doesn't like lined paper.
Wow.
That's interesting.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, what a simple. Like,
is that true? Did it find it?
What a quick fix.
Totally true.
Interesting.
So some people have a high visual spatial bias. Dyslexics tend to do that, for instance. And some people have more of a high language bias. So if you've got a preference towards language, your brain likes that regimented process of thinking in linear thought. So lined paper is really good for that.
Right.
Takes some of the encoding that your brain would otherwise do, and it allows you to use the paper to encode. So it reduces the pressure on your short-term working memory. Whereas the opposite's true if you use lined paper and your visual spatial. Your brain doesn't think in this linear construct.
Yeah. So it just adds more complexity.
It forces the brain to encode in a way that's unnatural. So you fatigue more. Short-term.
I can relate to that. Like as a creative, I always go for a blank piece of paper to start, and then kind of laying out really where I'm going to lay out the info on the sheet. Like it's part of the process of it. And always in school hated lined paper too. That's really interesting.
Yeah. You might have a visual spatial bias. I suppose,
maybe.
But given what you've gone into, you probably do.
Yeah. I mean, I'm curious about the
Chris
math.
$1,500 after this.
Yeah. I got to be careful here. No, but I'm curious about the math.
We do our tests are like dollars now. We've managed to collapse that cost by 99.9%.
Be a good follow-up. Does the math, the connection with being strong in math, does that have something to do with the fact that it's not language based? Because it seems like there's obviously symbols and stuff in there that are using the same character set or same alphabet to write out, like sign or something like that, right? So is it because that it's more, the brain doesn't have to put together sentences and make meaning out of them, that it's, does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. So maths is actually a little bit more complicated in that you get your very basic arithmetic, which sits inside the part of your brain that uses language. And then once you get beyond arithmetic, it moves into your brain that uses spatial structures.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So algebra, calculus, anything like that, that's your spatial processing. And your brain utilizes those pathways to be able to solve those problems.
Cool. So I think this has been an absolutely fantastic sort of grounding for us in understanding this whole subject. I was vaguely aware of it, but I didn't have any idea of the sort of the subtleties and the layers and things like that. And I guess getting back to the sort of the AI side of things. I suppose looking at it from your perspective as both, the CEO of a very successful company, and also somebody who's neurodivergent yourself. I mean, to start with, do you use any AI tools to assist you in your daily work?
I've been a fan of GPT since day of release.
Yeah,
really. I did my first ever company brochure over Christmas, where I thought, we've got a new feature. I'm gonna write the copy for this.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
As a dyslexic, obviously I've never done this before.
Sure. Yeah.
Oh, right.
What I tend to do is I tend to go through a process, and then when I get the key points that I want to land, I will hand that to somebody else in the business, and they'll structure it so that people can understand what I say.
Yeah. Right. And so this time you turn to GPT as your like editor.
Yeah. Do you know what? It took us probably about, after my bit of work, it took me about 2 hours. Finished the whole thing. It was outstanding. And
Yeah.
Did you find that the way that you communicated with it was like in the same kind of alignment that you might communicate with someone that you would hand like to a human employee? Like, did you feel like the same amount of information you had to provide got you a similar result?
No, I needed to give much less information in to get high quality information out. It was fascinating.
Oh, that's interesting.
That is really interesting. And is that is that just stock ChatGPT, or have you pre-built a GPT model to? No,
For that event, that was just a standardized
stock
version of GPT.
Yeah. It's so
Yeah.
powerful. It's fantastic. So and how does that make you feel when you're using it? You know, do you feel like excited? Do you feel like it's a miracle? Do you feel like, you know, how is it? Yeah.
So it feels a little bit like when you first started using Google and you were asking it questions and it was giving you the answer. You think,
Yeah.
this is amazing. I was using Yahoo and it wasn't very good.
Yeah.
And now you can use GPT and just, it's another leap of a technology.
Mm-hmm.
We've gone from whatever propeller planes to jet planes, and it happened in the blink of an eye. All of a sudden, the jet plane was here and it was free to use.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's it, isn't it? That was like 18 months ago. And I remember George, you were there as well. We were in Lisbon at the time when ChatGPT launched, I think, or a couple of weeks after. We were at a conference in Lisbon, and one of the guys who was at the conference with us was like, "Have you seen this?" And literally within 10 minutes, everybody, all like 300 people in the room were I'm sure we crashed the servers or something, because everybody all of a sudden were like, wow, this is incredible. And we'll get into write rap battles and things.
That's
like
what I'm saying. Everyone was doing the same thing. They were like, take my company mission and make it as if Tupac wrote it or something.
Yeah. And then like, you know, within the last 18 months, like even then things have progressed. People are finding use cases for it. And like you say, you know, you obviously used it yourself personally. I suppose in terms of like use cases for AI, obviously in the business, you also use AI as well. Could you explain a little bit about how that works?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been on a little bit of a journey. We were reasonably significant users of machine learning. Pre that, there's a lot of challenges in digitizing cognitive assessments. So typically they've been, for about the past 50 years, they've all been paper-based. We had to construct a digital one, which has lots and lots of advantages, but challenges in how you build that. So what we used to do back in first phases of the business, when a certain number of people had gone through our test, we would take the results of that test, of all those tests. We would hire a team of clinical neuropsychologists and psychometricians who would go through a process of effectively almost like refactoring the scoring mechanisms on our test to make it more accurate. We would feed that in and then repeat the process again in 2 weeks, 3 weeks time. So very quickly we start using ML to try and replace those psychometricians.
Interesting.
And be able to get that system to be able to respond on the fly. So now,
and what was that? What was that with? What sort of technology were you using to do that?
It was we're using an Azure stack.
Oh, okay. And you said it was with machine learning.
With ML inside, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We have our own team of internal psychometricians. A psychometrician, by the way, is someone that studied psychology and statistics. I'm oversimplifying it. If there's any psychometricians listening, I apologize.
Yeah.
So they really understand the science of neuropsychology and the capabilities of statistics, and then good ones will teach themselves in Python that we would work with.
Oh, gotcha.
And then we were able to script up ML processes.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And so just so I understand, the ML process is really about creating a training model, right? Like you set up parameters of what you want it to understand and then feed it information and then have to somehow vet that info or vet the outcome that it created, right? Is that a general way to think about sort of, I'm trying to come up with a concept that's easy to split ML from sort of overall AI.
So this was actually, there's a standardized process that we would go through to refactor that assessment. for the scoring.
So like a
And
normalization sort of thing.
Oh, yeah. And it can be complicated because we've got these special practitioners, but we kept scripted this ML model that would be able to take the data set that we have and run it through that process. And then that allowed us to be able to, so we dropped from, we used to age bracket people into decades, each decade, and then we would score based off your decade. The reason why this is important is because when we're mapping people's brains, different parts of your brain mature at different times of your life. Mm-hmm. So vocabulary will continue maturing up until your late 50s, I think. Whereas some of your mathematical constructs sort of peak at early 20s.
Right.
So we need to understand the individual's age to be able to score them accurately against their peers.
Mm-hmm. Oh, interesting.
But we used to do it to a decade, which is how all the paper-based assessments do it. Mm-hmm. But because we're a digital application, we get those scores stick in the data warehouse. We're able to query those scores. There's no PR, no personally identified information in there. Mm-hmm. And then we can renormalize it.
Oh, Chris, you there? Okay. Yeah, sorry about that, guys. We had a bit of a technical glitch here, but we'll just jump straight back into the conversation with Chris. Chris, the last thing we were talking about was the renormalization, and obviously no private information being held. I think it was about the bandwidth. Obviously rather than using the decades.
Yeah, the age bands. Yeah, rather than using decades of age, we through that ML process we can really crunch data because it's just a server doing it, and we're now able to get accurate scoring, and we found the most accurate is within about plus or minus 6 months from that individual.
Oh wow, it's that sharp, that precise.
It's amazing, and we rerun it now every 24 hours.
Oh wow!
Right.
So it's continually getting more precise, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
And so this is when you were first using ML. I mean, this was a big step. What sort of impact, I guess, did that have on you as a business? But also, what impact did that have on the people you were working with?
So ultimately, we were able to demonstrate that we can have very, very accurate results, and we can do so very, very cost effectively. So paper-based assessments, you might see they'll renormalize maybe every decade to every 12 years.
Right.
And we're now doing it every 24 hours. Mm-hmm. They're doing it to decades. We're doing it to plus minus 6 months.
And does that allow you to better tailor your support for individuals? Does it allow you to what's the sort of, I guess, looking from a business perspective, you're working obviously with businesses to try to increase their neurodiversity, does that give them more information to allow them to incorporate neurodivergent people into their workplace?
So it's particularly more based around the precision and the accuracy of the results from the assessment.
Okay.
And what we were able to prove is we could focus a lot more on that precision and that accuracy. Mm-hmm. And part of the process on the back of that, we became the first digital assessment recognised by UK awarding organisations to be accepted as evidence for adjustments at high-stakes exams.
Oh, okay.
So we would be able to identify that, for instance, this brain will be disadvantaged when trying to process information in a time-limited exam. And it'll benefit from having more time to remove that discrimination that it'll face.
Gotcha.
We were able to supply all of our evidence and our processes to these awarding organisations. They reviewed it internally, signed us off, and became a first digital assessment approved in the UK.
Wow. That's cool. So, and I guess that helps everybody, right? You guys, it's a successful business model. The people get diagnosed quicker and more accurately. Companies got more information. It's like a win-win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we've got, for instance, doctors that couldn't pass the final exam, and then we map their brain and go, oh, do you know what? There's something called a speed of processing. Some brains have it, where part of the brain works really well, but it takes more time to basically process that. And we're not talking minutes here.
Sure.
But when you put a lot of information through in a confined period, that brain can't operate on the capacity it would normally operate in. So it effectively gets crimped. So we're able to identify those brains that get crimped and say, if you want to test them, you need to uncrimp them and use extra time. That's a proven scientific method to do so. And our evidence can identify those people and supply the evidence to get them the adjustment.
Wow.
So we've got doctors that weren't going to be able to pass their doctor exams.
I mean, it's genuinely life-changing. Like, there's not many people who can work in a job where you can say, certainly there's nothing I've ever done in my life where I can say is genuinely impacts people in a life-changing way.
Yeah.
And do you know, this science has been around for 50 years. It's just been really expensive and really inaccessible.
Right. Okay. And this and Cognassist and especially with the use of like ML allows it to, it speeds it up, makes it more affordable, improves the whole process.
Exactly. Yeah. And then sort of it democratizes that so that everyone can have access to it.
Sure. So in terms of, sorry, go for it.
When it comes to, say, like the example that you had mentioned about like the doctor, right? The doctor who can't pass the exam. Like, how much does your company have to get involved with offering alternative ways of measuring that person, right? Because I would imagine if it's like an academic environment, you say like, okay, well, this person needs more testing time, and that's an easy thing to do because it's academia. But if it's in a professional environment, are there like tactics that are also offered for each kind of brain type that would help that employer understand how to maximize the effect of their employee?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so these are known as strategies. So we market them as strategies, and that's what they're typically called. From a legal perspective, in the UK, they're referenced as reasonable adjustments, and in the US, they're referenced as accommodations.
Okay.
I think you have the American with Disability Act. Accommodations are a legal requirement if someone has a neurodiversity. Same as the UK, we have the Equalities Act. We call them reasonable adjustments. Ultimately, though, every brain will benefit from strategies, such as and some of them are super simple. Oh, by the way, Chris, you should use plain paper because your brain doesn't like plain paper.
Yeah.
I love that.
That's cheap. That's a cheap
It's
solution.
so simple.
Yeah, you think better and you fatigue less if you.
And you would never think of that, right? It's just something you would ever really, it's so seemingly trivial, but completely revolutionary. Yeah,
and they get more and more complex. And as you learn strategies, you can scaffold them on top of one another.
This is incredible. I think everyone needs to be, obviously, as you said, like the everyone's brain's different. I wonder what would happen. I'm really interested in getting tested for this sort of, just in general now, to understand what type of thing my brain is, what type of brain I have.
Yeah. And then what can I do about it to make it work
right? It's that sort of the quantified self, I think, is that that big sort of West Coast movement. I don't know, with people talk about dropping like all these like monitors in and various different blood tests and things like that. But actually, this is something which is way more fundamental than that, understanding what type of brain you have.
And how does it process the world around you?
And how does it process?
Mean about how you take in information and are able to respond.
That's fascinating.
So obviously that was something you did with ML. How long have you been doing that now?
I think we're probably about 5 years in.
Okay. And then has there been anything subsequent to that, or are you planning anything else with artificial intelligence?
Yes, AI was one thing I completely probably everybody completely mistimed it. I thought it wouldn't come for 10 to 15 more years.
Right, yeah.
And then
it's that bombshell that morning when you discovered ChatGPT, you're like, oh, wow. Me as a copywriter, I was like, well, that kind of changes things.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so... one of the things we realized as we were scaling this business is that our data set is phenomenal and unique and enormous. We've got one of the world's biggest cognitive data sets. And I had a previous business I set up at university, and I used to deliver computers to people with different types of neurodiversities.
And so was this something you set up after you'd been diagnosed?
Yeah.
Okay,
So
right.
that process of assessment, being diagnosed, given some basic strategies, and then some more advanced strategies. My university paid for a computer with some specialist software.
Right.
And I thought, this is actually really good. Why doesn't everyone get it? And
Right.
it's because it's $1,500 for an assessment. And then all there's downstream costs as well.
Sure.
So I set up a business providing computers for other dyslexics, and then we scaled that to support what's known as pan disability. So we did all of cognition and neuro, and we did musculoskeletal, mental health, and sensory. And so I used to go and deliver a lot of the computers when we first setting that business up. One of the things I found out is that I could tend to accurately guess the neurodiversity once I'd met the person.
Okay. Did it take you a while to build up that sort of ability?
That skill set, yeah.
Yeah, that skill
set.
set.
And I could then start reading sort of their reports, sort of the software that they're getting or the information, what courses they're studying, chatting with them, and then being able to figure it out. So that gave us an idea that I thought, well, I went into engineering because I like maths and I don't like words. And I like problem solving. And if you map my brain, someone will say, that brain doesn't like words and likes maths and problem solving. So I thought it was my decision to drop certain subjects at school and focus on other ones. But was that decision made for me in the womb? And I was acting out a highly probable process.
Right.
So I thought, and then I went and delivered all these computers, and I thought, you guys are like me in that you've ended up in a space that you're probably more likely to end up in because of the way that your cognition works. So I had a theory that if we could map people before at the start of, for instance, a university course, find out how they did at university, then the next set of people coming in, we could figure out if those individuals have a higher chance of dropping out or succeeding. And if they do drop out, can we figure out why? And then could you intervene? And by this point, we had a lot of colleges and universities working with us. So we'd mapped a lot of individuals' cognitions. And we were able to join those data sets and then very accurately predict who would drop out and why.
Right.
And therefore, that institution could go in and say,
wow,
all right, Chris, do you know what? You're dropping out because you really benefit from plain paper, by the way, and you're using Lined. And here's some other strategies, and we'll support you on them so that you won't drop out and you'll achieve.
Oh, wow.
So it's that prevention rather than cure sort of thing, really addressing things up front.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, can we figure this out way early and just can we support that individual?
Yeah.
And we did it with 5 organizations, and we proved it was really, really accurate. But then came the technical challenges and the commercial challenges of can we deliver that into a productized solution and scale it? And that's where we found that's difficult.
Right.
So as I was trying to solve that problem and figure out how do we do this, my friend sent us a WhatsApp, says you got to see this, because he was doing some mentoring for me on ML and AI. ML, and I started exploring GPT, and it took us a while to click, but that means that we could effectively use AI with our own data set. We don't need a third-party data set to activate our data.
Right.
Because AI is smart enough to be able to do that. And that's
so what process does it? So what does AI actually do? Is it in what are you using? Like what's the AI solution that you're using?
So we use GPT ultimately, and then we have what's known as a grounded model that we train ourselves. We train it on educational psychology, neuropsychology, occupational psychology, basics of a few other types of sort of cognition areas. And then we can replicate that conversation that I had with an educational psychologist about my brain and strategies. Utilizing that technological process.
And so you feed in a candidate and it comes back with suggestions, or did I miss that? Did I get that incorrect?
Pretty much, yes. So go through our test, get an individual and get their brain mapped, and then we can say, based on this, we would recommend the following strategies for you. We're just a software product, so we don't really know much. But then that individual can say, well, I'm actually a nurse and I do a lot of management of prescriptions. And I find the numerical bit on prescriptions really difficult, and I have to slow down, take some time on doing that. And if I get things wrong, that's the bit I really have to double check. Before AI, there was no way to do that without going off and spending $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 on a clinician.
Right. Yeah. Okay.
Wow.
We can probably do that now for a penny or a cent.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Don't tell everyone your business model.
Yeah.
That is insane, though, isn't it? I mean, that ability to I suppose in the first use of the ML, it was the analysts, I guess, if you like, the statisticians that you were kind of able to replace, which is one thing. But to be able to offer like clinical advice or replace sort of very expensive clinicians is that adds that democratization, as you mentioned earlier. It's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it comes back to originally. So we had to build the test to get the data, and they're phenomenally expensive to build.
Right.
So, which is why there's very few of them. Once we've got that data, then how can we activate it? Right. And we realized we could activate that. Again, not cheap to do. One of the big challenges with these types of things can often be the expense of building things.
Right.
But we've got the data set, which gives us that moat. We can invest in that application. And then, like you say, we can democratize how people can access this, how they can understand themselves.
It's incredible. It is incredible.
When it came to that model that you were referencing, the GPT, you're using the GPT model as the kind of higher level one, but you mentioned this base model that you're training on the specific set of knowledge. Can you go into a little bit why you guys chose to go that way, as opposed to just having the GPT model use what it already knows about that information?
So we have to train the GPT model on our own data set. And also, I'm not a psychologist, so we have a specialist team, what we call an independent scientific advisory board, in our own internal team that makes sure that everything that we're training it on is sound. So GPT isn't a specialist in this space, and we also need the process to have certain behaviors. And those behaviors aren't structured inside of GPT.
Okay. Gotcha. I think that's an important note overall for just like how GPT is perceived versus how it's actually used and rolled out. You hit that boundary where there is a generalization of knowledge, but not the specificity there to rely on it for something like psychology. Yeah.
And something as important is the way that individuals are going to use our application. I likened it a little bit when we were trying to build it out internally. So I'm not sure if anybody's heard the Google versus Apple model of the internet back in 2005, 2006, where Google said everyone's going to access the internet through a browser. And Apple said, no, they're not. They're going to access specific things that they want through an app. And I remember hearing that and thinking, oh, this is amazing. What will it be in 10, 20 years' time? And it turns out actually we use both.
Yeah.
But if we want to go into a general aspect, we use a browser. And if we want to use something specific, we use an app.
Right.
And that's the way that sort of I've articulated our strategy.
Okay.
With how we. So if you want to use something general, you would use OpenAI, just go straight in. But we're very specific. We only do the things that we do. We do them really well. But if you want to use us for anything else, we won't be very good. So we're an app, ultimately, in that model.
Interesting.
And that's
very similar to when we were talking with Awanke a couple of weeks ago, when it was they were doing I think it was Awanke, and they were doing they were training the large language model basically on the company's information. It might have been with Matt, actually.
Oh, that's actually with Writer. Yeah.
Yeah,
with
yeah,
both
that
of
was
them. They're both doing it in
with both
different
of them.
ways, but
So what they're doing is that they're using like their CRM, their marketing material, their website, all of that sort of stuff to feed into their
yeah.
the model, and then they're able to query it or ask it questions with really really contextual data, so they can really interrogate who their prospects are, what their offerings are, and it really empowers their salespeople to be able to understand what they're selling and who they're selling it to. It's a very different application, but a very similar sort of specificity.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm.
I probably did a massive disservice to explaining that, but I'm sure. Hopefully, it made some sense.
And I think you'll see as it matures, and I'm normally wrong about these sorts of things, but I do tend to try and copy off of this, and copy off history, and I think you'll see probably that you'll have these mother or AIs, and then you have lots and lots of specificity ones.
Mm-hmm. I know there's certainly something that I've done in developing my own GPTs on top of ChatGPT, just to give it that additional information, so that whenever I'm asking questions, interrogating, I don't have to fill in as much of the details when I'm building prompts. It does a bit. I've already pre-engineered a lot of that prompting, so it just saves me having to say, "You are this. This is what the scenario is," etc., etc. And it's very lightweight, very easy to do. But I think that level of personalization just makes your interactions with tools like ChatGPT and other chatbots so much more rewarding.
It really is, doesn't it? Yeah, and you're standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
We did a lot of analysis on GPT 3.5, and we have effectively, if you imagine like the Turing test, but for neurocognition, can it answer these questions effectively? And 3.5 would get itself confused most of the time.
Gotcha.
And then we did 4, and all of a sudden it just hit that threshold upon which it understood the science in a way in which it was able to give the right answers. I mean, that was a leap. And that's when we thought, let's take this off the side of a desk now. It's a real much thing. More formidable technology.
Yeah.
And I was watching a podcast. It was it was with a chess player. I think he's in New York, called Gotham Chess. Really, famous YouTuber podcast. Chess YouTuber. Anyway, he was saying that he tried playing chess against ChatGPT with using GPT 3.5, and he said it was like playing against like a child. And then he said he started playing against GPT 4, and he said it was like playing against a really competent chess player. But then every now and again, it would basically like lose itself, and it would make a little error every now and again, which would be like, okay, this is a bit weird. But then it would sort of restart again. But he said the difference between 3.5 and 4 was just like night and day in terms of its ability to understand the chessboard and comprehend advanced moves.
Interesting. Yeah, it is. And I know 5's allegedly around the corner.
I mean, yeah, we're on a path now to something which is, I always compare this to like the when you first saw a laptop, and they were like these huge clunky beasts of a machine, right? That couldn't do actually that much. And now, in a blink of an eye, we've got, so much power at our fingertips, and we're only accelerating in terms of, obviously we're not accelerating in terms of processor speeds at the minute until I guess quantum computing comes in or whatever, but we're accelerating in terms of the ways that we can apply this technology. And AI, it's such a nascent stage, and it's just going to explode over the next few years.
I mean, the NVIDIA just announced their new chip structure, right? Which is because like all of this stuff up and for the past say 6 years has been running on graphics cards. Like we basically found a bunch of power in graphics cards, and all of a sudden you have the chip manufacturers going, well, instead of us making a computer where we put a bunch of these cards in, let's make a chip with a bunch of the processors on them and connect them all together and just pack the efficiency of that whole stack into one chip. And I think like that that unlock is going to change the amount of computing power and the neural networks that can be created from that at a scale that's going to be bonkers. I mean, to me, as soon as it gets into the multimodal, that's where I'm blown away. I saw a video of someone taking like the classic cup in a ball in a cup challenge where there's one ball.
I saw that video. I think I saw it on your LinkedIn.
Probably. Yeah. And the fascinating thing was that the way that they specifically did it was intentionally confusing. They numbered each cup going down, right? So they would say like, this is cup 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But every time they moved it, they wouldn't refer, right? If they moved 1 to the 3 position, it wouldn't go 1, 3, 2 every single time he renumbered them. So the system had to keep track of the visual aspect of the cup and ignore what was being said to intentionally confuse it. And it every single time got it right of where the ball was. And it was like, of course, to your point of different brain structures, it has a brain structure that can memorize things. There is no short-term memory problem. And it's just, all right, I'll just watch this thing, which to me is going to, like that, when that meets the productivity unlock is going to be, I think the things that we think are going to accelerate are actually not going to as much as the thing we're not anticipating is going to actually jump light years ahead, if that makes sense.
Who knew that, like, when the internet came around, who knew that, you'd have all these issues, what have been caused by, I don't know, social media and the huge social issues and political issues and everything that has been caused by social media, which was a direct result of the internet. Nobody predicted that, right? So what's going to happen with AI? It's crazy.
Opportunities are endless, hopefully.
Yeah. So I know we've been recording for probably about an hour or so now. Chris, I guess normally we'd ask for your advice for somebody looking to get into your line of work or something like that. But I think what'd be more appropriate would be, what advice would you have for somebody who may have concerns that themselves or somebody that they know, may be neurodivergent and could benefit from this?
So I think sort of everybody should get an understanding of their own cognition. Strategies help everybody. They're not. They don't just help one type of brain and not others. We all think and learn differently. And I honestly believe that if we can figure out how we work the best, then we can all achieve more. Because we're in the knowledge working economy.
Mm-hmm.
And
increasingly so.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And interesting, how much is AI going to take away some of that knowledge economy and how much of it is going to give it back? Right.
Yeah. That is we're at a sort of fork in the road, I guess, and or are we? We're at a fork in the road where we think this is going to happen, but will it come back? Will it cross over? Will another? Will we be placing these roads with teleportation devices? I don't know. The future is this metaphor isn't going to work because I don't think any of us can really understand what's actually happening.
Yeah, probably more important now than to understand your own cognition and make sure you make the best of it.
Right.
And if somebody wants to get their brain tested or get themselves their cognitive behavior assessed or whatever, I don't know what the right term is for that. I know we've been talking about it all today, but what's the actual name of the test?
So it's a Cognassist cognitive diversity assessment.
Okay. And so would they just go to the Cognassist website and
at the moment, we don't have a consumerized version.
Oh, okay.
So we sell to businesses, and then all their employees can access the strategies. And it's a bit more complex. We effectively plug and play the infrastructure that allows that organization to become neuro-inclusive.
Mm-hmm.
So
people ask your employers, everyone, if you're listening, ask your employers to provide you a test and get in touch with Chris. Maybe not Chris directly. He's a very busy man. But get in touch with
Cognassist.
No, I hear he shows up for every single test.
Yeah.
Chris is
300,000 tests later.
right.
Yeah. Wow. Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. I've learned so much, not just about AI and how it's used, but also about something which affects everybody. So, thank you very much, Chris, for this. It's been an incredible podcast.
Thank you so much for your time.
Welcome me on board.